Yes, I kept my bangs I wanted to see. I cut them a little bit too high, but whatever. We're gonna watch The Mysterious Death of the Eight-Day Bride. I'm also gonna put away a couple balls of yarn and work on a scarf. Cause hey, I got a product fair going. I'm participating in a crafting fair, okay?
This week on Buzzfeed Unsolved, we uncovered the eerie story of the Eighth-Day Bride, a bizarre twisted tale of a hasty marriage, a secluded cottage, and a love triangle with a deadly end. You know, all the makings of a terrible rom-com, but a great case for us.
You don't want a hasty marriage.
You don't want any of those things. A hasty marriage.
Hasty marriage, bad.
Secluded cottage.
I wouldn't mind it.
I'm just saying the combination of these three things together is an amalgam that you don't want.
Bad brew. Let's hear about the bad brew. Let's get a big old ladle full of it.
Ooh,
Scoop it up, baby. Scoop it up. Let's slurp.
It smells spicy.
Sure.
All right.
Take it away.
On the evening of May 20th, 1947, the body of 22-year-old Christina Kettlewell was found 150 feet from her honeymoon cottage in just 9 inches of water on the banks of a river in Severn Falls, Ontario. But before we get into the details of her death, let's dissect the circumstances that would lead to the discovery of Christina's body in the river.
Yeah, why was she
Christina
in the river?
McCone lived in Mimico, Ontario, and worked at a bank where she was described as a capable employee. On May 12, 1947, Christina eloped with John Ray Kettlewell, a 26-year-old war veteran better known as Jack, after knowing each other for 3 years. Christina's family had a concern about the marriage. Ronald Berry, a 28-year-old immigrant from Italy, was Jack's best friend and a professional ballroom dancer.
So?
It's said that Jack, Christina, and Ronald spent an inordinate amount of time together. Christina's sister Helen would comment that the family thought that perhaps Ronald was in love with Christina.
So this is the classic case of two people in a relationship, but then there's this best friend who third wheels quite a bit. For instance, I third wheel you and Sarah all the time.
If I'm Christina, I'm putting myself into Christina's mind right now, you know.
Yeah.
I'm a beautiful woman. I'm married to this man, Jack. What's he got going for him? He was a veteran?
Yeah.
Okay, there's Jack.
It's weird to talk to you when your eyes are closed.
And Jack's, let's go elope. Okay, we'll go to the church. Who's this friend of yours?
What's happening right now?
Wow, who is this strapping man who is your friend? This is my friend. Don't worry about him. He's just a lousy professional ballroom dancer. My stars. Mama. I can't get over this guy. That's me putting myself into her mind.
That was highly disturbing.
It was
I
weird.
didn't like it.
I just think if I were a woman in the 40s or 50s, and you meet a professional ballroom dancer,
Yeah, I
you're
mean,
going to be swept off your feet.
but he's in love.
Maybe quite literally if all goes well.
Oh, dear Jesus. Yeah, okay, very good. Yeah, sure, I get it. The family was saying that he was in love with her, though, not the other way around.
Oh, so I'm a professional ballroom dancer.
Okay, no, please don't do this again. No, please don't do this again.
All right, okay.
Following the elopement, the Kettlewells spent the next few days at an apartment in Toronto on Tyndall Avenue. Bizarrely, Ronald joined them for the entirety of their honeymoon.
Were
And
they a
on May
throuple?
17th, the trio headed out to Ronald's remote cottage in Severn Falls, only accessible by boat.
Now, we could both agree that bringing your best friend along to your honeymoon is an odd choice.
That's a little strange because the honeymoon, I've heard, is for sex.
Yeah, it's for the sexy time. And he's
Were
just
they a
sitting there in a
throuple?
chair
Just,
eating a peach.
we're gonna head down to the hot tub after this, or
Hey, guys, could you get some more beer in here? I'm getting a little thirsty.
a little weird.
During their time at the cottage, it's reported that Christina began to act out of character. She would go into crying fits, while at other times seemed completely dazed. Evidence
that's
suggests that Christina had conversations with Ronald about whether or not Jack truly loved her. On May 20th, Christina disappeared from the cottage. Curiously, on the same day that Ronald's cottage mysteriously caught fire. Ronald
That's
returned to the
suspicious.
cabin to find a disoriented Jack sitting in the cabin with an apparent head injury and pulled him out of the blaze. He looked for Christina, but couldn't find her anywhere in the cottage. Ronald recalled that the cottage burned to the ground in just an hour. He took Jack on a boat to Severn Falls to reach a car to drive him to the hospital and contacted the police. It was then that Ronald discovered that the situation became even worse. That
What
evening,
happened?
Christina's body was found in
crap.
9 inches of water just 150 feet away from the cottage by Melville Sweet, an owner of a boathouse in the area. Her body was free from burns or any signs of violence. An official autopsy found traces of codeine in her stomach, but her ultimate cause of death was declared a drowning. Interesting.
Okay, I think codeine is like a pain medicine, because I was prescribed some painkillers with codeine in them after I had my wisdom teeth removed. And there was like a warning saying, hey, this product contains codeine. Because codeine is like, I think, in cocaine, and that can be addictive.
Interestingly, Major Lawrence Scarterfield, who tried to help put out the fire in the cottage, said he saw no signs of Christina's body in the area when he went to fetch water from the river to help with the flames just hours earlier.
That's interesting.
Maybe this guy's just not good at his job.
Or she was moved there later. Because
Yeah.
her body was found at night, hours later.
Oh, I see. Okay. If you're arriving to a scene and there's a building on fire,
Yeah, I guess your focus is on the burning building.
usually people focus on the burning building.
That is true.
Jack, Ronald, and 20 other people were questioned by police in connection with the case. Jack was interrogated by the police for 3 hours after being released from the hospital, where he was treated for burns, shock, a head injury, and apparent drugging.
Seems odd to drug yourself.
Again,
Yeah.
unless he
He was just like, let's cover it up.
Yeah, some codeine for me as well. That'll puzzle him.
That's true. I mean, it's working. I'm puzzled.
However, Jack claimed to not remember anything that occurred after 11 a.m. on the day of Christina's death. Ronald was questioned by the police for a grueling 13 hours,
got a little
in which he
tingle in my
provided a
downstream.
3,000-word statement that the police would describe as, quote, fantastic, end quote.
Fantastic.
I don't know. I found that very funny too. Great statement. We all were blown away. What a
Just imagine
performance.
the cops reading it and just finally putting it down like, fantastic. I'm sad it's over.
Good read.
Wish I could read it all over again.
Yeah. Good job, sir. You're free.
You ever thought about doing some sci-fi?
Can you sign the back of this? Over there.
On June 19th, an inquest into Christina's death began, which became quite the spectacle. The public packed not only the courtroom, but the grounds outside, with some even approaching Jack and Ronald, the main witnesses, for autographs. It should be noted that Jack and Ronald were not on trial for murder. This was simply a case to determine whether or not foul play had been involved in Christina's death.
an important thing
While
to
the
find
highly
out.
sensationalized investigation uncovered many interesting bits of information, the jury of the inquest ultimately could not agree on whether Christina's death was the result of foul play or not, stating, quote, due to the fact that the post-mortem examination disclosed codeine in the stomach of the deceased, and due to the suspicious fact that she was found drowned, this jury is unable to decide on the evidence given whether or not foul means were employed in her death, end quote. Jack and
Suspicious means
Ronald
were
were in
employed
the
in her
clear,
death?
as there was no evidence implicating either of them in the death, but their relationships to both Christina and each other were thoroughly exposed in the process.
Were
The
they a
police report
throuple?
claims that there were signs and evidence that Christina was very distressed by the, quote, unnatural conduct of her husband and Barry, end quote.
Wait a minute. Were they smooching?
Maybe. I did mention a love triangle up top.
A love triangle.
You were just thinking of a love triangle with Ronald and Christina.
I was doing some heteronormative bullshit.
You were. Unbelievable.
I apologize. Do you think everyone in town was also scratching their heads over were people...
It's 1945, so yeah.
Yeah, a lot to talk about
Yeah,
then.
probably.
It was like
With the
47.
circumstances surrounding her death laid out, let's get into the theories of just how Christina died. The first theory suggests that Christina may have been dealing with mental illness and killed herself. The largest pieces of evidence that Christina may have killed herself are the several suicide notes written prior to her untimely end that were uncovered during the inquest. The first note, written on Easter Sunday before their engagement and about 5 weeks before the wedding, was addressed to Ronald. In it, she writes that she tried to poison herself and talks about, quote, the uncertainty of receiving a proposal, end quote, from Jack. In it, she claims, quote, this will be the best way out, as I cannot bear to see another girl have him, end quote. Jack recalls Christina being sick that day, but claimed in his testimony that he was unaware of the suicide note. She wrote another suicide note at the end of April. This time, her intention as detailed in the note was to not only kill herself, but Jack as well. In this note, also addressed to Ronald, she wrote, quote, "When you love someone, you really love him. And I know there is no one for me but Jack. And if I cannot have him, I do not intend anyone else to. I waited, as you might say, in the hope that Jack would ask me to marry him, but I now realize I am just a passing fancy," end quote. The last note was written the day before she died. It was addressed to a Mrs. Thomas, who owned a home in Mimico that Christina and Jack stayed in for a little bit. Once done, Christina asked Ronald to mail the letter for her. She writes, quote, "Ronnie is in the boat outside somewhere. By the time he gets back, everything will be all over with. He must have been afraid something would happen because he is staying an extra day to make sure we go back to Toronto with him," end quote.
Now I'm suddenly wondering if Ronnie is concerned for these people.
I think Ronnie may have sensed something was wrong and was like, oh, maybe that's why I should go on the honeymoon. Maybe that's why I should stay an extra day. Her saying he's on the boat or something somewhere, by the time he gets back, it's all gonna be done.
Yeah.
Which I guess you could interpret as many things. She could be talking about a pot roast or something. But I don't think she's talking about
I'm gonna
pot
put
roast.
it out there, I don't think she's talking about pot
I mean, maybe it went
Yeah,
bad,
like a
burned down the
murder
house. You know,
suicide.
I've almost burned down my apartment trying to make cheesy bread. You could interpret that letter however you want, even though there's 2 letters that precede it that state her intentions pretty clearly.
All notes were confirmed by a handwriting expert to have been signed by Christina. Ronald held on to all the notes from Christina, but he never told Jack about them until the inquest. Strangely, Ronald was able to and chose to save the letters from his burning cottage.
Okay, if Ronald is in fact innocent,
That's kind
he
of
sees
weird.
this burning house, it is a little weird that he thinks, oh, let's go find these letters and save them from the fire.
I feel like he is so intertwined in their
Yeah.
their drama. He knows that getting those letters is going to help clear things up for everyone.
Yeah,
I would
see
guess he
that.
probably saved Jack. Well, it's not
Got some
totally
time,
burned
better
down.
grab
It's not
those letters
backdraft
that-
yet, so jump back in, grab the letters.
Those exonerate me, good.
Good, got that. Great.
Okay, now where's Christina? I don't know.
I know.
Maybe I mean,
Lunchtime.
at that point, I would hope I don't run into her.
Yeah.
Because if she just knocked him out, set the house on fire, I probably would be imagining the bride from the Haunted Mansion with the hatchet in her hand.
Yeah.
Furthermore, one newspaper reports that Christina may have been in the cottage when Ronald rescued Jack. In either his testimony or one of his 2 lengthy statements given to the police, Ronald claimed to have returned to the cottage after sunbathing and found Jack with blood on his face and clearly disoriented. However, in this description of the events, Ronald says that Christina was in the cottage too. When
Was she in the
Ronald
cottage
asked
or
what
not?
happened to Jack, Christina did not reply and simply stood there with teary eyes. Ronald carried Jack out of the cottage, and when he went back in for blankets, he saw Christina for the last time. He noted a strong scent of coal oil in the living room, and smoke began spilling out of the kitchen
Wait, what's
about
coal
15
oil?
minutes later. Ronald could not find Christina when he
oil
returned for
infused
her,
with coal?
and he also noted that a weapon or anything that could have been used in Jack's injury was not to be found.
This is a completely different account.
Yeah.
Drastically different.
I'd like to put it out there that the new version of events that is cataloged here, equally confusing.
Yeah.
It's just
It's so
still strange.
You got to take the newspaper report with a grain of salt, especially because it does make us look at this case in a very different lens.
Yeah.
While this seems to implicate Christina, it should be noted that this is different from every other telling of the story by Ronald. Crown Counsel C.P. Hope, the lawyer leading the inquest, called Ronald, quote, a liar of the most blatant kind, whose sinister figure permeates the whole of this tragedy, but whose purpose and design are shrouded in mystery, end quote.
This guy's like fucking R.L. Stein. It's a good quote.
I'm going to remember that word for word and just start saying that to people. You know what? I got to be honest with you. You're a liar of the most blatant kind whose sinister figure permeates this whole tragedy, but whose purpose and design are shrouded in mystery.
He might as well have finished that off with In the Twilight Zone. The
Yeah.
guy's like goddamn Rod Serling.
Yeah,
it's
I like it.
it's
I
unbelievable.
like it.
This brings us to the second theory, that perhaps Jack and Ronald were not so innocent. The first bit of evidence that suggests the duo may have planned this is a series of insurance policies purchased before Christina's death. Jack took out 2 separate life insurance policies on himself and Christina before the marriage. Each 5,000 Canadian dollar policy conveniently contained a double indemnity clause, which would allow the beneficiary to collect twice the amount if the cause of death was accidental, a sum worth around $200,000 US today. Strangely, Ronald was the beneficiary listed on both policies. Ronald had also taken out a 5,000 Canadian dollar insurance policy on his cottage that would later mysteriously burn down, and named Jack as his beneficiary. It should be noted that Ronald had failed careers in both construction and insurance. Additionally, the inquest revealed that Jack had given his war gratuity, a payment to Canadian servicemen when discharged, to Ronald, and that Jack had removed all of his family from his will for reasons unknown.
That's interesting. So they both file these insurance claims and list each other as the beneficiaries for a situation that seems very outlandish that just somehow happens shortly after they file these policies.
Could just be bros, you know?
Bros that just so happen to get incredibly lucky, I suppose.
Yeah, you know, the beneficiary thing is a little, it's fishy.
Also,
It's a
Christina's
whole fish
wedding
market.
ring became a suspicious detail in the inquest, as it was never recovered. Reports differ as to whether Ronald purchased the ring for Christina, or if Jack borrowed the ring from a married friend, and the true price of the ring is also debated, ranging from $1,000 to $13,000. Nevertheless, it was never found after Christina's death.
I mean, it sounded like she was having a rough weekend.
Yeah.
Totally
She
possible.
just took it off.
She's out there by the docks. She takes that wedding ring off and just throws it.
Oh, I guess, yeah.
teary-eyed
Yeah,
into the
that's
lake.
probably
That's true. You could
possible.
look at it that way, where she was not sure about the marriage. She's obviously maybe about to do something horrible. Let's just chuck this ring out for solidarity.
Chuck that
Or you could
fucking
look
ring.
at it as they carried out this plan to gain some finance, and then they're like, let's take the ring too. You would think that ring would turn up eventually then if you hawked it, like at a pawn shop.
Would it? Rings all kind of
Well,
look the same,
especially
right?
after, I mean, this case is quite famous in Canada. That probably would be worth a lot.
Oh yeah, this is Canada, right?
Yeah.
Oh, that paints this in a whole new light for me.
Does it?
Yeah, they're very, obviously the stereotype is that they're a very polite people.
Yeah, peaceful.
So this is very funny to me now.
Oh, you're just imagining it kind
It's
of like,
oh, jeez.
oh,
Oh, no.
no, he bonked on the head.
Oh. Oh, the dang cottage burned down. Oh, no.
Jackie.
Oh, Jackie.
Jack's statement to the police after the fire was another fascinating exhibit entered into the inquest. In the statement, Jack states that he and Ronald had been in an intimate relationship for some time. However, in court, Jack claimed he was coerced to make that statement as the police wanted to build that story in their report. The police commissioner did in fact touch on this relationship in the report of Christina's case. In it, he writes that the relationship between Jack and Ronald was, quote, to put it mildly, to be unnatural, end quote. There was no evidence to prove this relationship,
Yeah, there
but
isn't
it was
any
highly
evidence.
suspected. In the inquest, Crown Counsel
about the
C.P. Hope
evidence
didn't
anyway?
believe Jack was coerced and suggested that the two were actually lovers. Jack finally agreed to this after Hope hammered him with questions.
Dude,
The
just
Toronto Star
crush the
describes the
answer in that.
questioning in an article from June 20th. Quote, when Kettlewell, after vigorous questioning, agreed with Mr. Hope's repeated suggestion that he and Ronald were male lovers, the fantastic triangle of twisted and thwarted emotions took shape, end quote.
I will say that I, in a weird way, kind of feel bad for them if they didn't do it, because now not only are they being suspected of murder, but they're being outed, which is not cool.
Now I
Yeah.
wonder if they drove her to this. You know, she's thinking
Oh,
this
'cause
is
she-
her idea.
Yeah.
They're driving her to this and sort of, they know her moves.
He knew her moves for sure. Ronald did, because she wrote these letters to him.
She's confiding in him.
Yeah.
But he can also be reporting back to Jack.
But for, yeah, exactly.
She's going to try and burn the house down. She thinks I'm going to
Oh.
leave and go, you know?
So it's not like they murdered her, but they didn't stop her.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, what a tangled web we weave.
Christina's sister Helen claimed Christina was drugged just prior to the wedding, and when she came to, married. She just accepted it. Indeed, the police report states that there was a strong suspicion that Christina's state of mind was something other than normal for a while before
It's a
her
whole
death.
lot of crazy.
They believed that the mind-altering effects were a result of drugs or medication. It's unclear if Christina was self-administering these drugs or if she was being drugged. Helen also claimed that Christina appeared to fear both Jack and Ronald. The owner of a home that Ronald and Jack lived in together said that Christina had mentioned she was worried something bad may happen if Ronald went with them on their honeymoon. It appears Christina was right to be worried. Jack went on to marry another woman 3 years after the tragedy, and the two of them lived a short while in the same home he briefly shared with Christina. Jack started a family with her, but they separated in the late 60s.
Do you think he was like, this honeymoon's a lot better than my last one?
I'm sure he did.
She was like, oh, what do you mean? It's actually a very sad story.
Yeah.
Jack never spoke of the incident or his first marriage. In fact, his son Richard and daughter-in-law Sharon only discovered this part of Jack's life after Sharon came across an article while doing family research at a library. Even though they uncovered the story while Jack was still alive, they never broached the topic with him before his death in 1998. As for Ronald, he moved to New York in 1956. Before he left, he gifted his Pekingese dog named Ling to Jack's son Richard, who was 2 years old at the time. And then, Ronald was never heard from again. Was Christina Kettlewell murdered by two of the closest people in her life in a sinister plan to break a tragic love triangle and collect insurance money? Did the bride endure great internal strife to which she saw no end? Perhaps it was simply a freak accident that took a young life. In any case, it appears that the death of the 8-day bride will remain unsolved.
Okay, here's what I think. Maybe the two guys were bi, and they both loved the gal, and they loved each other, so it could have been like a throuple situation, but the gal had, like, some mental issues that, like, weren't being treated properly at the time because it was, like, the late 40s, and therapy back then was, like, kind of a joke. So, I think that she may have had, like, a mental break and, like, burnt the cottage, and then the guys might have been, like, and then, like, shit happened. Like, she could have been, like, abusing drugs or something like that. And then she ended up killing herself and almost killing her husband. And, yeah, that kind of sucks. See you on the next one.